Hello, hello. We are back again for another Wet Ink Wednesday, and I have Tyler Omichinski here. Tyler, say hello.
Hey, it's me.
I usually do an interview. Tyler is a writer, or a summary, right? He's a writer. You're a gardener. You're
Yeah.
a Canadian. I don't know. What are some other titles that you want to go by?
I what a good question. I've long had the joke that I can be convinced to do quite a large number of things if someone's willing to pay me enough for it.
Ah, yeah.
So that's kind of my general attitude towards things. But the hat I have been wearing most often has been a writer and designer of TTRPGs and the related content. And now that I have my lungs and voice back a bit, I'm getting back
Mm,
into the podcasting and that related space. So I'm a
nice.
podcaster and actual player.
Actual player. Cool.
Yeah,
I
if
didn't.
that's the right term for it.
Yeah, cast and member maybe in actual plays. I don't know.
I don't, yeah.
So you mentioned podcast, and that's kind of like where, though we did meet in person one time, I've listened to hours and hours of your voice on your podcast, one of your podcasts, and I, your co-hosts are there to talk about
Mm.
video games, and you're kind of over in the corner just shouting like "stonks," and that is like that is a comedy version of the podcast, but I valued your contributions to that show because you were always like talking about the economics of the business model of like selling TTRPGs or memberships to, Netflix or whatever. You just had like a
Mhm.
businessy kind of perspective that you brought to that show. And so tell me about that. Like why was that what you were there on the show to talk about? Like,
So,
where does that come from for you?
so it's like my education originally is political science major, business minor, and then I went to law school because at the time I was convinced that you could use those to make the world a better place. And
Mm,
then because of what at the time I didn't know but have since been realized is a neurodivergent diagnosis and some other idiosyncrasies and bad luck, I kind of got kicked out of the legal industry because of what's the quickest polite way to put this? Because
you were playing the game. You didn't want to play their game.
I didn't want to play the game, and the place where I was,
Mm,
I I ended up in a very bad situation with the law firm I was working at.
mm.
And hypothetically, the Law Society here in Canada, it's the equivalent of the Bar Association in most states for Americans, uh, kind of was like, that sounds like a you problem. And my response
Mm.
was, I'm paying you 5 grand a year in membership fees.
I-
Why? What did I get for that? And they were like, you get nothing.
mm.
So this actually ties into like my origin story in TTRPGs. I
Sure.
was living in Vancouver at the time with my partner, and basically the law firm hadn't paid me in 4 months. And for those of you who don't know, Vancouver is one of the most expensive cities in the world to live in. Uh, so
Not
a
not a good scene.
no, so a friend and wasn't getting paid and was having to pay the law society to not help me and pay for various other things. And a friend of a friend was like, I had a writer drop out. I need 15,000 words by next weekend. And I'll pay. And I was like, I mean, the pay for TTRPGs is better than what I'm getting paid for law because
I,
I was getting paid nothing.
nothing.
So I got my first gig there
That's
and they paid on time. And that was because this is 2024, that was about 12 years ago.
all
And
right.
one of my main sources of income ever since has been stuff in the TTRPG and board game space. So a bunch of stuff happened. I ended up living in Toronto, met up with Boris, and we worked on its canon and comics I read for years. And the podcast itself went through a couple evolutions and iterations because it's 9 years old at this point too.
Sure. That's a long time for any effort is a long that's a long time.
Yeah, and we always really thought it was important to talk about both like the art and the idea behind comics, and to be welcoming of that like very nerdy space of Batman's cool. Like he just is. Sorry.
Sure, it's I mean,
Even if
I
even if
have
you
to
think
check if I have do I have my Batman shirt on today? I do not.
even if you think he's kind of a fascist, he's still cool, and that's
Well,
the resonance of it. Not that fascists are cool, but like they have designed him in a way that it is very resonant and very culturally able to talk. So we always wanted to have those two sides of it, and talking about how there are people behind making these things, and they have thoughts and ideas and politics and views, and also are like responding to these systems,
yeah,
and really grapple with a lot of these issues that we were even seeing back then. And I think that recording this in 2024, where we've seen the absurd level of layoffs in tech and video games already this year,
yeah. It's
that
oh, and the end of last year.
yes, of course, I'm not to like, not that it hasn't been a bunch of problems coming together, but I think that divorcing those too much leads you to these very limited takes that end up becoming just marketing for those companies. Like,
Hmm.
there's a full economy on YouTube and Instagram or whatever of just reacting to things Disney or Marvel or DC say. And even if you're critiquing them, that's just marketing for them. Like they've
It's
planned
true.
for that. And
Sure.
we always wanted to kind of talk about that and how those all fit together. So it evolved over time, and we always wanted to have that take on it and talk about
Yeah.
things that often get brushed over until they come up. So like we tried to talk about like writers unions and creators unions, and then we saw last year like that all of a sudden was a huge deal. So the dream was that people weren't all of a sudden like, oh yeah, there is a writers union and they are striking, and what does this all mean? And the idea was we were trying to make sure people were able to come in a bit more prepped for that. I'm
Right.
currently on hiatus from them because I have had COVID at least 3 times, and the last time, like, not to sound like a drama queen, almost killed me.
That's
Um, I
that's
we where
not
I
good.
live, where I
Yeah.
lived at the time, I had a fever of 106, which is not
That's
a good
that
fever you want to have.
that's not a good fever. That's a bad one.
And my partner called our local hospital, and the hospital's response was, "We're full."
Yeah.
So I don't know what, but maybe try to keep him cool.
Yeah.
So my
Ice bath.
partner, so my partner, who's wonderful, helped me through that, but it did a number on my lungs, and I'm on the back end now, but I can actually feel it after talking for a little bit. The catch in my throat,
Yeah.
it's kind of a weird cough. It is hard to do live things, especially with like the regularity that its canon is aiming for. I
Right.
had to take a step back to just be like, I need to recover. In part being, if you are talking every single day and trying to deal with this lung situation.
Yeah, I mean, definitely maintain your health more than have hot takes about
Yeah,
subscription models or whatever. But uh
exactly.
uh uh, so I want it because so I find it so fascinating that the having listened to its canon and
Mhm.
you know the things that you guys talk about on that show, and it is I listen to a few other comic shows, and they're mostly interview shows or opinion shows where people are like, "Oh, I read this
Mhm.
comic this week. It's great. You should read it too." Or they're like, "And then now we have the creator on. The creator's going to talk about working with the artist and where the inspiration came from." And your take with at least its canon is you didn't do either of those things. You just you did talk about like it was a great game, it was a great video game, it was a great comic, it was a great movie, it was a great TV show. You guys talked a lot about the like all the Disney, Star Wars and stuff like that. It got talked
Mhm.
about a lot. Um, but it wasn't an interview show. It was because you mentioned like trying to like bring the humanity to or like
Mhm.
remind people that there are people behind making the art, but you didn't do that through an interview show. And I just find, I don't know if that's obviously an interview show and scheduling is difficult, but I, it's just an interesting describing, like you describe it one way and then you did that by talking about the unions, but not interviewing the creators. It's just an interesting I don't find it as like a conflict. I just find it an interesting solution to that thing. Is like you're going to focus on this part of the industry, but not in a sort of superficial way that's just like, yeah, what's your new like a night? It's not like a nightly like the nightly TV shows that are
Mhm.
produced in New York, right? They're always like, and what's your newest project? Great,
Yeah.
let's watch a clip. Like they don't go very deep on those things. Um, it's not what that show is for, right? So I don't know. I didn't. I'm sorry. I do this often. I make an observation and I don't end with a question. So like,
I have a great response to that though. So
great, great.
it's actually so that's a we in the very first iteration we did do interviews,
Mm,
and over time we did stop, and it was well, we did them very occasionally, usually as part of a special. And I think you hit the nail on the head of that. For us there were kind of two big drivers. And one was a mistake we had made that we felt bad about,
mm,
that I'll go a bit into in a second. And the other one, because it's a bit longer. And the other one is that, very understandably, it is hard to get a creative who's on contract
mm.
to go deep into things and to like talk about things,
Yeah,
which, in my opinion, this is me talking for me, not talking for the rest of the canon. I think we have a larger problem in a lot of media right now of people don't want difficult, like, and by people I mean like most people do not want an interview that holds their feet to the fire at all.
sure.
And because of the current plethora of choices, they don't have to.
Right.
So, um, ages ago, like years ago now, I talked to you and a bunch of other people about the possibility of NFTs in the board game and TTRPG space.
Yeah. It has
And
been years ago now.
and
Sad,
I
sad the
and I
passage of time.
and I spent a ton of time and work on it, and I ended up having to scrap it pretty late because ex- because I expressed any skepticism about NFTs in the blockchain publicly, the companies just would refuse to talk to me.
Yeah.
And I would be like, I will give you the questions in advance. We can do this on your schedule. And they would just be like, you don't understand the community, man. And to me, if you're not willing, like, and to me, that's a red flag.
Sure.
And I can't ask a creator to put their livelihood at risk, and we can't get the people who can answer questions. So it
Right.
became largely a thing of, well, what are we doing for the audience?
Right.
The other side is, I'm not sure if you or your listeners are familiar with the Golden Bell fiasco. Um,
That doesn't ring any bells.
so Bing,
Yeah.
so there was a company that my understanding is they have kind of been pushed to the edges of the industries that they were part of. But there was a company called Golden Bell that was out of New England-ish area, and they they went really fast. They had a decently charismatic guy in charge and seemed to have money behind them, and they were able to get. They had a Garfield license. They were making board games and stuffies and all these other things, and then it collapsed very publicly. My understanding is they are banned from BGG and Kickstarter.
That's
Um,
you have to do something real bad to do that.
yeah, so most people know about it from their involvement with the Unbroken saga, um, where, and I don't remember the specifics of all the situations. I'm trying to talk in broad generalities of my
Yeah, yeah.
recollection. But Artem Safarov, from my understanding, had created the game Unbroken beforehand and was like trying to figure out a Kickstarter, trying to shop it around. And Golden Bell kind of came in and said, we'll help you do this, make this whole thing. And then very quickly revealed that, like, ooh, what are they do? They don't know what they're doing. They were like sending things via media mail that didn't qualify, which is
Mm.
mail fraud.
Yeah, yeah. Don't
And
don't do that.
like they were there were allegations that they were holding games hostage, demanding more money from people. Artem, I know from what he was saying, kind of at the time, was not happy with them, and it all kind of, my understanding, ended when they literally ended up on like a Judge Judy type show over one of their things, and the judge just demolished them.
Mm.
While their CEO is trying to be like, "Well, I'm going to law school, so I know this stuff," and the judge was like, "I am a judge."
Hmm. I've
Um,
already I've completed law school.
yeah. So
Wow.
we we helped them get their first media coverage.
Mm.
And we were champions for them really early on because they seemed like nice people. They seemed like doing a lot of stuff that was really cool and interesting.
Okay, so this is
And
how this gets back to like what you were saying about like this was
yeah,
your oops that
yeah.
you
And we always felt weird about that after the fact because basically, we at once both do not think we did anything legally wrong because
hmm
there's no way for us reasonably to find out, blah, blah, blah. But we felt like we had morally not done enough.
mm.
And we felt a little bit responsible for helping a company that went on to do, a little bit of damage to the larger idea of Kickstarter and of, this indie board game space. And we just always felt weird about it
Yeah.
and kind of made this thing of like, we can't really ever, like, being just three people, we can't ever really create a system where we can legitimately get the interviews we
I-
want, vet them the way we want,
yeah, vetting is tough.
and not feel gross if we misstep or what have you.
Yeah. Wow. I now it's my time to be like, I have no response. Uh that's I, I mean, for one, thank you for sharing this whole big long thing. I mean, this has been a lengthy introduction to like you and your work. That I mean, I'm personally fascinated by it. This is like my own private episode of It's Canon. So thank you for that. I mean, it is it, I, I mean, I think what you're it is such a I mean, I don't this thing that I'm doing here with you is today is
Mhm,
like so low down on the level of like media, right? But it is part of it, right? And I do
mhm.
meet people at cons and I'm like, hey, I want to interview you, and I talk to them about their show and I share their links, and in general, I haven't had one of them turn out to be a problem. But that's yeah, I mean, what if one does, in some future, somebody that I don't, because I don't do much vetting other than like I met you and you seemed cool. And like a lot of the people I talk to are people that
Yeah.
I've worked with. So I have a higher level than just I met you. But yeah, it is, I don't know. It is sort of it does kind of invite you to ask yourself, like, what really are we doing? Because I don't want to only promote the newest Kickstarter, I want to ask people about like why they want to create games or how they
Oh,
make
for
it work
sure.
for them, and do deeper conversations. But I think about what you said about they don't nobody's feet, I don't hold anyone's feet to the fire either, really, but that's because most of the people that I interview are not doing like controversial work like that or big work,
Mhm.
like tell me about your solo game that, is on itch is again, it's where I'm scrounging for crumbs here at the bottom of the not except for you, of course. You're like a whole
For
loaf of bread.
am I? Am I? I don't know about that.
Slice of bread, slice of bread. You're more
I
than crumbs, is what I'm saying.
I will also say I think that part of it is like you're talking like the focus is here is more on the creative process, and I think that
Yeah,
it's a different kind of discussion.
yeah,
And I mean, there's tons of awesome podcasts about there, but I don't know. I've listened to a couple of things, and I think that holding someone's feet to the fire when it comes to talking about like your creative process and your creative work is a lot different because people are more willing to talk about it, right?
sure.
Because it's a thing that like, oh yeah, were you inspired by this? And especially nowadays, we don't have a culture anymore, which I love in this. It's one of the things I love about the space is like we don't have a culture of like, I was never inspired by that. No,
Mm.
how dare you?
Oh
Like
yeah,
people were
yeah,
like people wear their inspirations on their sleeve versus think about like music from the 19 like no like 1800s, like old timey classical music. People would be like, "Oh, you seem inspired by that," and they'd be like, "How dare you?" And part of it's norms, and part of it
right.
is what are the sacred calves and stuff. And I think that that's an important part of it. And I think
Yeah.
that also like,
What I think
oh, go
there's
for it.
also like a victory of nerd culture, you
Yes.
know, the fact that something like San Diego Comic-Con can go from like a bunch of nerds to like some of it's just a gigantic media engine, and media is money and all of that
Yep.
kind of stuff. Like that is, and so then money is all of the things that money is. You know, it's a different, that's the thing that's happened in our lifetimes, right?
Yeah.
It's a different focus.
Yeah.
It's not.
A lot of people didn't expect those little fish to become these gargantuan whales that like can move continents. Right. But
Yeah,
like Gen Con, PAX, San Diego, like those all started so tiny within not my lifetime, but a lot of
yeah,
people not much older than me, all of those
right,
started within their lifetime.
right. I mean, I definitely, there are people who I hear rumors of people who are like, Gen Con needs to come back to Lake
Oh, yeah.
Geneva, you know, and
Oh God.
be what it was, you know, 45 years ago. And it's like, I think that ship has sailed, sir. But you know, I I I, I guess good luck with your petition list. I guess you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Uh, all right, we've wandered very far afield from my agenda that I showed you at the beginning, which is totally fine. I love it. So we should talk at least a little bit
Mhm.
before we go too much further about the Never Going Home stretch goal adventure that you wrote.
Yeah.
We're going to change gears completely here, like, and because that is one that in talking about like it, uh, and we're going to talk more about your other work and stuff like that in a minute. But
Mhm.
like that's the thing that you've done most recently for Wet Ink Games, so that's one of the things we definitely want to talk about. And I wanted to I mean, I think this was part of the discussion or whatever, but like this set of books that we're working on that are like they've been laid out and they're getting looked at by backers as we record, and like a couple typos have been found, and we're going to fix those before we send them to print. So the core books, or the books for this campaign, are almost complete. But we had a bunch of stretch goals, like 19 or 22 stretch goals. So like a
Say you
whole,
hit you hit a few.
we hit a few, and we keep them low. And it's been a pleasure to work with so many different creators, 19 different creators doing this.
Mhm.
Were you among one of them? You being one of them. And so because we're at that stage, I'm trying to talk to people about their stretch goals. So like the books are behind us, the stretch goals, and we kind of, with this whole campaign, it's sort of like, or the whole this particular effort, it's like this is probably the last big books that we're going to do for the line. So anything you want to do is fine, because there's going to be no more. It's the last hurrah in some respects, is what we're doing. So um anything that anybody wanted to do, I said, yeah, sure, great, fine, do it. I don't care. Show us how weird and wonderful the setting can be. And so I don't know, that was a particular direction that I gave you at the time, that, but your idea is pretty different from most other people's ideas. Like and I don't know if we should reveal all about the game. If you want to hold some back and let people experience the adventure as they get there, we can do that. But definitely most of the people who write about like a squad of soldiers in World War I being sent out to investigate something weird and creepy, maybe some people have disappeared. You usually get to the end of the adventure and there's a big ritual going on, possibly involving human sacrifice, probably a gate to the other world opening up and a monster coming through, and then you have to shoot it with, you know, hopefully you brought along some grenades or something like that. And
Mhm.
you know, you didn't do that at all. And
No.
so um if you want to talk about like what you did do and why you wanted to do that, and why, I want to I would love to hear about it. Like what direction did you take the story, and instead, and talk some about that and your inspirations and
Ye-
motivations.
Yeah, I'd love to. I Please feel free to correct me if I get some specifics wrong, because I know some stuff changed in the drafts.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
before it even got to you, I know I changed a couple things, and I know a couple of things got cut, but I'm having the moment now of
Which version
which
exists?
version was the final one again,
Right.
because I
Well,
know one.
and they still have to go to editing, and
Yeah,
we're
a
not even at
hundred
the
percent,
final
a
stage
hundred
yet. So
percent.
like it's But yeah.
So the Cole's notes, without going too much into it, of like I'm gonna try to keep the finale
Hmm.
not I'm gonna try to keep that for a
Hmm.
surprise.
Hmm.
But the Cole's notes are you're sent to go find a group of soldiers that aren't like they're missing, but it's kind of it was trying to set it up if they're missing, but it's kind of fuzzy why they're missing. Whether you're trying to be like, are they AWOL? Are they on a mission and haven't reported back? You're just supposed to kind of figure out what's going on, and there's some discontent going on in the area. You're getting these flyers of like other soldiers talking about like maybe this ain't it, chief. And the reveal is after the introduction, you get to the meat of the adventure that this unit is AWOL. It is a group of other soldiers who have kind of looked at all the weird stuff going on, and to them, this is the straw that broke the camel's back. And they're kind of like, the world wasn't great for us before all this happened. They're mostly supposed to be, I think in the final, they were mostly queer in various permutations.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
a key to the storytelling of this adventure, I
yes,
think.
they're definitely supposed to be outsiders in the sociological sense, right? Whether it's people of color, whether it's queer people, whether it's religious minorities, what have you. And they're all kind of like fighting to get back to where we were before the war is actually not for us.
Right.
And they have a plan to not do that. And it really, like, the players kind of have to grapple with that, and that's what the bulk of it is finding out all the pieces of what they're doing, and whether you agree with them or not, and then what you're willing to do as a result. Uh, which, yeah, is different than some of the other things. It was a little bit tricky to write in the style.
Yeah.
Because this is actually one of the things I love about specifically Never Going Home. Is the style of how you write adventures is like how you've set up the standard is a delight for being like, here is the bare bones skeleton. Here's what you have to do to get through. And it, for a writer, there's some stylistic rules that hopefully I don't know if all the I don't know if non-writers could see it, but it allows
Hmm.
you to be very efficient with your words. Um, right before this, I was writing some 5e stuff, and 5e has some times where, like, if I was talking to you, I could get this across in like 10 words because it's like, oh, Constitution save DC, whatever. But because
Right.
of like how 5e is written on a technical level, you have to do like this essay on it almost, right? Of like, right, like we don't just say, oh, you have dark vision 60 feet. It's every single time something has dark vision, you have to write that block of text, which
Yeah.
eats words, eats layout. So being able to be really sparse in that, you basically have these choices throughout that lead to very different endings, while hopefully being interesting and compelling without being as combat heavy as some other stuff in the Never Going Home universe.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that you chose to explore, and there's other the plan right now is to collect the stretch goals together into three
Mm-hmm.
sets, and the one I can't remember the name that I gave it, but your adventure is placed with a number of other adventures where people have sort of come up with alternate endings to the war
Oh.
rather than just being a soldier and getting killed or whatever. Like that
Mm-hmm.
is that is a path of horror that some people have explored, and those are all together somewhere else. But like the group that your adventure will be in is other people who've done that, where it's like
Nice.
maybe the combat isn't as important in this mission. It is more of investigation, it is more wrestling with what you really want. It is,
Mm-hmm.
the inviting you to ask questions that that as the characters that that bleed happens a little bit, right? Maybe you're asking those questions as a player, but the definitely as a character is being forced to confront those things, and what are we really fighting for and stuff like that is a huge theme, or it hasn't been a huge theme. It's like an undercurrent, I guess,
Mhm.
between the in from the beginning of the books, World War One being sort of like uh such a easy place to mark as a big transition point, although obviously history gets more complicated the closer you look at it, the less clear everything is. But certainly in retrospect it seems to be a major change. And
Mhm.
yeah, what is the world, what can we make the world look like instead, is something that is, you've made text that has been subtext, so I
Mhm.
appreciate that
Oh, awesome.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, is there a particular, I mean, obviously, like everybody, hold your toupees on. Like, gay people have existed for like all of human history, you know. Um, so putting queer characters into World War One is not like ahistorical. But just if you didn't know that already, now you've heard it
My
from me.
God. Oh, it's
Um,
crazy.
so is was there anything in particular that inspired you to do that with this setting, or is it just sort of that general, I want to put this story out there, or was there some historical basis that you were kind of picking up a little bit on, when you were setting up the adventure?
Yeah, so there were, by a fluke about the same time you asked me, there were two events that happened in my life. The cool and chill one was I was working on a I was doing research for a bigger project that I'm trying to find a home for, and might have a home, but is a lot about queer. It's a TTRPG about being queer and the horror of the world. And uh, I came across this one excerpt in the research, which was, I think it was during World War II. It might have been just after World War II, where a naval commander is being pressured. American naval commander is being pressured by the Senate to like look for gays in his unit, and like, oh, it's a problem because at the time of McCarthy's Red Scare, there was parallel the
Right.
Lavender Scare, which is a bunch of people who were either actually queer or just like, I don't know, that guy holds his pencil funny. I've heard queers do that, and
Right.
he
That's,
whistles. Only queers can whistle. That was an actual myth that was being tried.
oh
But he
wow.
goes to his secretary, and he basically says like, "I got I so we're supposed to start looking for lesbians," and because his unit was like all like I
Like
can't remember my
clerical.
military terms. Yeah, it's all clear, all people in desks and support staff. He was like,
Yeah.
"We're just looking for gays and stuff. We have this thing," and she was like, "I have bad news. I'm gay, and if you make all the gays in this unit drop out, it's going to be you and the janitor." And his response to this man's credit was basically like, "We're never going to talk about this again. This didn't happen. I didn't get that order. That's fine." So like you said, they've always been here, and it's just this like they fought and died just like everyone else did.
Yeah.
And then in my personal life, my partner and I were involved in founding a pride locally, and part of the impetus for that was there was a drag time story hour here, and a group of pretty far right wing people. Several of them were open Diagolon supporters. So if you don't know what that is, that's a pretty out there take. Uh, we're gonna protest it, and we're threatening violence. They were doxing people and like trying to force even people who were even people who were AFAB drag queens. They were like, that's still too far, and we're doxing them, contacting them, we're trying to get them fired. And we organized this great big protest, and at the end of the day, they had if you count everyone who showed up on the anti-drag side, they had maybe 27 people, and we had like 580 who
Yeah.
had just a party,
Yeah.
and we're just creating like a wall of like, you can't harass these kids if there are several hundred people between you and them.
Right.
So I had these things were both really like close to the surface for me when you asked, and I was like, well, we should talk about this, and this should be a thing
Yeah.
because as everyone can kind of see looking around, this we're in a weird, stressful time, and I've been an openly queer person for ages, and have gotten my fair share of hate crimes and stuff. But I'm also like in a position of absurd privilege, both for being white, being from an upper class family, all that jazz, but
Right.
also for the capacity for like when I get death threats, I just laugh. Like it doesn't, and this is something with my brain. Like I just don't take it seriously. I'm
Mm.
just like, okay, cool. I get much more stressed about, someone being like, hey, you owe me $10 actually. And I'll be like, oh
Mm.
my God. Oh, I didn't pay them back. I'm the worst. Yeah. So I thought it was really important. And then I had the opportunity to write about it for you. And I thought that was a really important way to tackle it and grapple with it without being too didactic about the answer. Um,
Yeah.
I hope it comes across that like the queer people you meet in the unit, like I hope that it comes across that the writing is supposed to not at all question their validity, but it's
Yeah.
supposed to question their strategy and what and their options, and get the players to think about that and think about their plan might be a bad plan, and I think there's arguments to be made it's a bad plan, but
Uh, Especially considering the context of like all magic being pretty bad in the
100%.
within Never
Yeah,
Going Home. Um, but right, I like who can blame the
exactly.
the tools are there
Hmm.
and provoke the question.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that that's what I was going for, and hopefully people end up enjoying it and finding
Yeah.
it good to think about. I mean, I always find that, and I don't know if it's the same with you. I feel like we talked about this ages ago, but that like one of the cool things about RPGs has always been that sometimes after a really good session or
Mm.
during a really good session, you'll just end up having like a 2 hour discussion on ethics that
Mm.
everyone is like really enjoying and really there for. That
Right.
I had to do first year philosophy too. That's a terrible environment for it. But we've all had those like D&D sessions where you're near the end of a campaign and all of a sudden
Mm.
you're like, "Oh no, like what is the better of these two options?"
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, it does provoke those kind of things because
Mhm.
I've certainly been in games. I think given the groups that I've played with more, I think it usually comes up to like I'm worried about these things, but nobody else at the table is. And so like we don't have the discussion, but like,
Oh, yeah.
because it's like it's a monster and we fight it. And I'm like, but we could have had plot reasons why there were different choices available. If this was this kind of table, we could have done a different thing. But
Yeah.
you guys didn't want to do that. You guys wanted to roll initiative and get the arrows going and stuff. And that's fine. Like whatever, Um, it wasn't like the storm giant was friendly. But anyway,
Yeah.
but that's just my own experience, I guess, with it. But like I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, it's like
Mhm.
all of those levels, right? The role playing
Mhm.
invites you to take on those other it invites everything, like to invite you to ask all those questions, right? Because you can do anything, but what do you do? It
Mhm.
becomes um more more of a question, right? If you don't have that many options in your actual life, you don't actually have to think about what you're doing because the obvious choice is from a fewer set of choices, right? But if
Yeah.
you've got, I've got 17 skills and a whole cavalcade of spells and
Yeah.
seven other friends, and we can do anything, it provides all the options as choices. Or
Oh, for sure.
yeah. So I don't know that. Yeah, RPGs are definitely more like that. Certainly, and some are better than others at questioning those things. So I appreciate a game that is relatively, like you mentioned before, like most people take Never Going Home and they do shoot the monsters with it. But you're trying to do something different with it, which I appreciate. So
Well, and it's always, I mean, Never Going Home has always had the poignancy of encouraging self-reflection and encouraging
mm,
those scenes of you
yeah,
telling
yeah,
stories about your fellow soldiers.
right,
And what I was trying to do is I was trying to extend that and be like, see, but everyone should have that.
yeah,
Which I think is really interesting. And to reference the big bad in the industry, like I think it's one of the few things that 5e I think did really well is like the paladin oaths are trying to force you to grapple with ethics questions.
mm.
And I think a lot of people very understandably are like, nah, that's fine. I'll just do the oath of vengeance and just whatever, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't think anyone. Yeah, I've got. I don't think I've played with a paladin in 5e. But I haven't played a lot of 5e, so
Fair.
um, I maybe we did have a paladin. Maybe we did have a paladin, but it
I
didn't come up that often.
I mean
Can't
paladins
remember.
and warlocks in 5e are such a like, hey, this could be like buck wild if your DM does a bunch of homework.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, it's a separate issue, but like
Oh, for sure.
our paladin was like this lady knight, and then there were six other players, so we all chose to be like dwarves, gnomes, or halflings, and
Amazing.
it was a maybe there were seven of us. I think there were only six of us. I think it was only seven total players, but it was very much a comedy bit that we were doing
Yeah.
as a group. Anyway, that's so it went in a different direction, is what I'm saying,
Oh,
than
for sure.
wrestling with big questions. Speaking of wrestling with big questions, which is not at all a transition,
It
uh,
could be.
it could be. We want to talk about some of your other stuff. Like we've talked. Thank you for your sharing about the Never Going Home adventure. But like, you have other things that have recently been published. Never Going Home, not technically out yet. But what are some of the other things that you work on that you want to talk about? Because you have said it's been your like main line for years now is RPG stuff. So what else have you gotten to work on recently? I mean, don't violate any NDAs if you've got any if you're under contract for like cool stuff, don't talk about that
Ah,
stuff. But like, you know,
yeah.
what's your publications like? Because I know you've come out with some stuff recently. Some stuff has
Yeah.
come out with your name in it.
Yes. Yes. I was actually in the prep for this. I realized that if everything hits to the schedule it's supposed to be on, which you and I both know,
Yeah,
sure, let's pretend that happens.
sure.
I'll hit 50 things I've been at least a contributing writer for in the TTRPG space. Um, the big two this year so far are Wild Hunt came out, which is a Call of Cthulhu book. It's a campaign by Stygian Fox, which actually kickstarted in 2018. So
Wow.
it's always a weird one to talk about because I am the first to be like I'm a better writer than I was back then because I think we're all perpetually getting better.
Sure.
Um, and I know one of the reviews we got pointed out like, hey, this ending doesn't quite gel, and I was like, that's fair. I was trying to write a campaign where like you could end up going a lot of different ways, being a lot of different places, and the goal was that like the ending was kind of this like set of blocks that it was there for the person running it to assemble like as they needed based on what the people had done. And if it's not quite there, I'm the first to be like, sure, that's entirely fair. It is out though. It's in print. It is gorgeous, and there is a supplementary like add-on book with two more adventures and a bunch more stuff that is in somewhere in production that is going to be a companion to it. So it adds more information on two of the groups that you can talk to in the Wild Hunt, including a World War I scenario where you talk to a group of veterans and you can dig into like what they experienced at the Somme.
So this is I Wild Hunt, it being like
Yeah,
this is the not just called the Wild Hunt. This is the actual mythical Wild Hunt that symbols and
Yep.
rages across the sky, and it's led by somebody who sometimes is Jesus and sometimes is other
King Arthur,
people. Yeah,
sometimes is Odin.
yeah. It depends on exactly who's telling the story. Like this is mythology, right? That you're
Sort of. So
okay, but it's got to
I
be a Cthulhu-ish take, right?
yes. So I hot take. I don't, and this is a little bit like in the weird Lovecraftian space of how nerdy you get about that racist. Um, but like the stuff Derleth did to the mythos, I dislike most of it. Like I think that
I yeah, I think
like
I feel
yeah,
like that's where the fandom is mostly at this point.
I talk to some people who are still like, no, like there's a hierarchy of them, and it's like that's
Hmm.
not the point. That's never been the point. So what I came up with was the Wild Hunt, like the legends were people trying to explain and interpret a thing that was just beyond them. And so in this, the Wild Hunt are an alien race in the Cthulhu term, not like little gray people. The Cthulhu term of like they are a race that is not humans, and they are sentient and doing their own thing, but are this middling power of I was trying to do like they are a humanity but for. They're not like they are
Hmm.
not individually as powerful as deep ones, but they are kind of what if all of humanity was kind of cultists and that take on it. So it deals with that and it struggles with a lot of revolutionary stuff. It deals with a bunch of people who are at the time like trying to fight for an independent Ireland and
Right.
arguing that whole side of it and delving into how much we've kind of like washed away our own history on that.
Hmm. Does it take place like it's like
It,
is there an atemporal element of it where it's like if you're it's 1960 and you can find the Wild Hunt and then people from World War One have just joined it in their own perception because it's outside of time, and then if you join it you could play characters from the 20s and then meet the people from the 60s because the hunt is always outside of time. Is it something like that, or is that something, I mean, I've invented that. Is that what it is, or
that'd
it's
be
like
that'd be a great follow up.
uh
But I will say like Stephanie from Stygian Fox has a she likes a specific like style of Cthulhu adventure, which is 100% like it's her prerogative as an editor and as
mhm.
dealing with the fact that Call of Cthulhu is like a licensed IP. You have to cooperate with Chaosium,
Yeah.
and depending what you reference, like you might have to deal with several other estates. I've been part of like the pitching process with Stygian Fox that before, and it is bizarre sometimes the stuff you'll get asked to change because it'll be like, oh yeah, we had to ask this estate of this one guy who because he owns this one word, and he says you can't use it for that, and you're like, all right, okay, like I have to write stuff then. So it is set in the 1920s. We do include a section on like how you could move it around and some stuff you'd have to juggle and change. But it's set in the 1920s and it's set in Boston, New York, and kind of the areas between them. So it I try to make it be very much a greatest hits of stuff in the city because I think it's been my vibe, or at least it was my vibe at the time, that a lot of stuff coming out for Cthulhu was like a lot more rural focused.
Hmm.
Which I think if you go back to like Lovecraft's original stuff, you can see why a lot of it's rural focused. It's a lot easy to be like, oh, there's spooky stuff in the woods. And I
Well,
think
he
there's a lot
wrote
of
just as much that takes place in like Providence. Not that Providence is like a metropolis, but it is a city, even
it.
in the
Yes.
19 teens, you know.
Yeah. I will say yes, you're 100% right. I should have been more specific because I mean like New
You don't
York is an
mean
entirely different beast, right? Like New
right.
York, Manhattan at the time is already what is it? I
Oh,
think it's grown like 20%. Like it grew like 20% in 5 years by population. So everyone locally is like, I don't know who anyone is, and you start that
yeah.
that's that's the start of that first era where you're like, oh, if I don't try, I will never see this person again. even though we could live like near each other.
Yeah. Certainly New York is way bigger than
Yes.
anything
Yeah.
else in North America.
No, you're very right to call me out. I'm like, I need to be more precise on that because I mean, like, they're
Well, I mean, they're both that way though. Like, I mean,
yeah.
there's certainly some, I don't know. But anyway, I'm no Lovecraft expert, so I should just cut off this line of my inquiry. Um,
I yeah.
uh,
It's yeah. So it's a really good book. I wrote it, I guess, 6, 7 years ago at this
yeah.
point. Um,
Have have you gotten to be involved throughout? Like you said, it looks gorgeous. So like, have you been involved? Like, I mean, obviously, you're just putting in words and then you're done with it, or is it like, who artists do you think would look for it? Like,
oh
here's
my
what we're thinking
gosh.
for layout. Like, did you get to be involved in any of that stuff, or was it just, thank you for your words, we will take it from here?
So I had a joke with some of my friends that this project felt a little cursed because, like, as you
I
can
mean,
tell, it
it's
got
only
delayed
appropriate.
6 years.
Yeah.
But it kind of had one thing go wrong after another, and I've written about it elsewhere, so I'm gonna try to the Coles notes. But it was like the first artist took the down payment and then disappeared,
Mm,
and then like the Brexit vote started, so the pound like all of a sudden dropped in value, which Stygian Fox is a British company, but all their printing is outside of Britain. So when your local currency drops by so much, like that's just money's just gone because
yeah.
you lost to exchange rates. And then Stephanie got sick, and then like, it's just a comedy of errors and then like COVID happened, and
Yeah.
then shipping prices went insane because there was that brief period when it was like
When there was a ship
20K.
stuck in the Suez Canal.
Yeah, and then it was like 20K to get a pallet shipped, and
It
you're like,
was
what?
it
How can you do a business this way?
uh
Uh,
you yeah, we had to make those decisions in 2020, 21.
yeah.
Yeah, like yeah, it was yeah, it's tough.
So
It's tough.
yeah, so I was quite involved originally, and then through between me getting sick and the world ending and all that, I was less involved,
Hmm.
and then kind of came back to do the final approvals and like help get it over the finish line. Um, having talked to people there, the goal is very much to not have stuff be like that again, and
Yeah.
understanding that and everything I've seen from them publicly, which is why I feel fine saying this, is like they agreed there was a bunch of bad things that happened. It is entirely understandable if you blame individuals for it, but they didn't want them to happen, and they're trying to fix stuff, and they're trying
Right.
to right that ship, as it were.
Right. And the product is out, and the end
And it's
result,
out.
and the end result is something to be unless you're that one guy who gave you a bad review, it's something to be happy with.
And to be fair, it was not a bad review. It
Ah,
was still like a solid review that was like, oh, the ending is kind of like the ending ain't it, Chief. And I was like, I mean, that's fair. That's
could be better. Could be better.
this was the goal. And if you and
Hmm.
then it was like, if you think like, and I was kind of like, this was the goal. And he was like, oh, that's if that was the goal, that makes a little bit more sense. I still think it wasn't as good as it could have been. And I was like, yeah, that's fair. Like I'm the first to be like, yeah, I think that it's entirely fair to take critiques on the chin as long as they're not like weird racial epithets.
Yeah, right. Great. That's it's a pretty good standard. Like
Yeah.
when to take criticism and when to not. Like, yeah. All right.
Yeah.
We are getting close to the hour. I don't think we've passed an hour yet, but we're getting close to it. So
Sure.
we should probably start to wrap up the conversation. Is there any other things that you've done recently that you would definitely want people to check out if they've enjoyed hearing this interview and you talk about the way you approach things? Like what else should people check out from you? What are your
Um.
if you've got 50, almost 50
Oh,
projects, that's not like this year, right? That's like total career
that's
projects,
that's
right?
total career, but
Yeah, yeah.
this
Uh,
year has a few. If again, if stuff it's just sticks to schedule.
but still, even if you have like nearly 50, that's a lot of stuff. Like what
That's
else would you
stuff.
recommend? What else would
Uh,
you recommend from your repertoire?
a one that isn't getting the love I think it deserves was for N Publishing. folks behind the Ennies, as well as one of, I mean, I'm technically an employee because I'm their online editor, I think. I don't know what my job title is. I don't know what my job title is, but they had for, I think it was for like their anniversary, but they got together a bunch of writers that they really liked and enjoyed working with and did the Vault of Splintered Souls. It's a mega dungeon in like the old timey style. It
Mm.
is a 100-page book with a poster to go with it. It is 14 floors with puzzles and fights and like stuff on the floors is impacting other things. And it is, I think it's quite good, but it's also one of those things of just, it happens sometimes in this industry of like you put something out and you're like, the people I think this is for aren't seeing it.
Yeah.
Which is just the nature of the beast. So that's the one that I'm trying to bang the drum on a little bit right now. Uh, it's for classic 5e, which I know is not everyone's bag, but if it is, or if you like dungeon crawling, it's
And,
there.
and it's adaptable to there are many D20 systems that it could probably be
Oh yeah.
bodged a little bit and made to work for.
Oh yeah, and a lot of it is puzzles that would be especially easy to either cannibalize or adapt to various situations. Like I know that there's one that you go to a feast and it's just like navigating the politics of doing a feast. I know
Mm.
mine is recursive of in D&D you have to play like a Warhammer style war game. So I'm like, yeah, there's some fun weird puzzles going on there.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
I follow what you said. I had to process it out loud.
Yeah.
I had to run it through my brain a couple times, but I got it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Cool.
your players around a table
You
playing with
you
little minis. It's
you
great.
find what is it? Little games. What you find a copy of little is it called floor games? What's it called? The
The Battle of Barvast Ridge.
no,
Very much
there
inspired by Hero Forge.
there's a H.G. Wells book
Oh.
called like Little Games or something like that,
Oh,
and
is it?
it
Oh,
proposes like that you could do war games with like things on your tabletop or something like that. It's supposedly, he's the first to write down a war game, but who knows if that's true because surely people were moving map to soldiers around on maps well before Wells wrote it down. But
yeah.
anyway, you find that text in D&D. You find that, it's
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Uh
It's fun. It's weird.
that's fun. All right. So thank you so much for your time today, Tyler. It's been a pleasure to talk to you and hear about so many things from your past that that inform you and animate you. And so if people want to check out these games that you've mentioned or other content from you, you used to have a Patreon. Do you still have a Patreon? Where can people find you and check out what you do?
Go to omichinski.com right now, which is omichinski.com. I'm in the process of still reworking that. I'm hoping to relaunch the Patreon later this year, but one of the things I'm going to make sure to do is have a backlog for in case I get sick again, because that's kind of, like I said, I got real sick a couple times
Yeah,
during COVID and it demolished so much of my
sure.
life and my brain. And yeah.
Well, hopefully not literally. And you've
Uh,
recovered. You've recovered.
Working on it, working on that recovery.
Great. I mean, that's great. One stop website, omichinski.com. Great.
That's the one.
And all of these things will be in the description of this video so that if you're watching this video, you will find it. So I want to thank everyone who has watched this video to I'm going to do the thing that I should do with the social medias. I'm going to tell you that you should subscribe and like the video and comment. Tell us what your favorite thing that Tyler has written over the years is in the comments.
Yeah.
Tyler, thank you so much again for talking to me today. And yeah, that's the end. Say goodbye.
Bye. Thanks for watching, everybody, and great talk to you again, Matt.
Excellent.